Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we are outside walking, and I thought I'll be talking a little bit about the most sun-loving roses while I'm out here walking. So let's begin the trip and let's get walking here. Now, when it comes to sun-loving roses, there's a lot of beginner traps. One of the major beginner traps I always see is people try to grow very sun-loving roses when they don't live a very sunny and warm place. This includes roses like Papa Milan, it includes roses like Eve Piaget, and it also includes roses like Isabel Renaissance, Mr. Lincoln, Oklahoma, Charles Mallorin, Chrysler Imperial, and in my opinion also Sweet Mademoiselle or Mademoiselle Milan. But the ones I see most common is nearly always Papa Milan and Eve Piaget. So keep that in mind. If you're living somewhere that is more moderate, where the winters can easily get down to -20, these are the roses you want to be careful with. They're very powerfully fragrant, but they don't like the cold, they don't like being wet during winter. But if you're in a place like California or southern France or maybe even in Spain, something like Papa Milan and also Eve Piaget might be some of your favorite roses because they get enough sun, right? So what are the roses I mentioned before I will only grow in a very sunny place? It was, as I said, Mr. Lincoln, Papa Milan, Oklahoma, Charles Mallorin, Eve Piaget, Chrysler Imperial, Sweet Mademoiselle, and Isabel Renaissance. Now, there are some very sun-loving roses you can get away with growing in a more moderate zone, and these are the ones I'm going to list here. The first one is a very famous Tanta rose. It is a rose called Mauritia. Now, Mauritia is a lot of people's favorite, and I don't blame them. If you live in a very sunny location, this rose will do very well for you. If you live in a more moderate location, you have to be a bit careful with Mauritia because it does want a lot of sun. It is not always as crazy about a wet soil. So this Mauritia rose is definitely one of the Tanta roses that don't have the standard Tanta health, right? But it does have a very powerful apricot scent, Mauritia, and you can still get away with growing it in a more moderate climate. You just have to be really careful about how you place that rose. And next one is L rose. L is a Milan rose. It's kind of fragrant like banana, right? Again, L is also one of those roses you can get away with in a moderate zone, but it does like a lot of sun. But you can get away with it. Next one is Fragonard. Now, Fragonard is actually very healthy. It is just a bit slow growing when it doesn't get enough sunlight. So it takes a long time to establish and also to flower. So Fragonard is definitely one of the most powerfully fragrant sun-loving roses you can get away with growing somewhere moderate. But it is still a rose that really prefers a lot of sun. But as I said, Mauritia, L, Fragonard, you can still get away with them decently well in a more moderate climate. Then you have Fragrant Cloud. Fragrant Cloud is another one of those really powerfully fruited scented roses that actually does like a bit of sun, right? But again, you can get away with that one in a moderate zone compared to the first ones I mentioned, like Mr. Lincoln, Papa Milan, Eus Pichet, and all those, right? You can definitely get away with fragrant cloud in a more moderate climate. It just won't thrive as much as if you gave it a lot of sun, right? The next one is Pierre-Detti, and Pierre-Detti is actually really healthy, but it does have a bit of an issue once you start going too low in the minus degrees. Like when it gets to around minus 15, it starts complaining in wintertime, and when you go to like minus 20, you can expect a lot of dead canes, right? I would often say if it only goes to minus 50, you're only going to, minus 15, you're only going to get like 5 centimeters of the top. That's dead growth. But if it goes to like minus 20, you can easily get like 15 to 20 centimeters of black cane, right? So it is another one that does want a bit of sun and also not always as rain resistant, right? It can get a bit of rain damage on the flowers. So Pierre-Detti is definitely another one I know prefers a lot of sun. And then you have Abbaye de Cluny, and Abbaye de Cluny is another one you have to be really careful with during winter. It is another sun-loving rose. And the same for the next one. The next one is Papi del Bard. I don't know how many Papi del Bards I have managed to kill during the winter, but I think we had 1 or 2. Luckily the last one established for me, but Papi del Bard, in my opinion, is not the most cold resistant rose, and it also does love sun, right? But it can look absolutely amazing when you see it from those more southern locations where it gets a lot of sun. Then you have the historic rose Madame Isaac Perret, and it is a rose that also needs a lot of sun and a lot of air circulation. It's still a good rose, but you do need to shelter these roses a bit more and give them a bit more sun in this category, right? The first roses I wouldn't even attempt if I was in a moderate climate. But these roses you can attempt, you just have to be very careful about placement, right? So the next one is Jubilee Papa Milan, and Jubilee Papa Milan you can more easily get away with in a moderate zone. It is only Papa Milan that really needs that full sun, nearly scorching sun. So Jubilee Papa Milan you can more easily get away with when you're in a more moderate climate. I will also say that climbing Papa Milan, from what I'm seeing right now, and it is a very young rose for me, but from what I'm seeing in the garden right now, it is actually the most healthy Papa Milan. It didn't have any winter dieback at all. It seems to put on a lot of growth. So I'm starting to think there's something to what people were saying, that the climbing Papa Milan was more healthy. And it does make sense, because when you want to make a climber, you're always selecting the most vigorous, right? You're going out into the field and then you're having a look at all the Papa Milans that are growing, and then you're selecting the most vigorous and you're crossing it with another vigorous one. And you can continue that for a long time until you have a climber, right? So it makes perfect sense to me why the climbing Papa Milan is more healthy, right? But the next one is Bearing Renaissance, and Bearing Renaissance is not that crazy about cold, right? It's kind of like Pierre-Detti. You have to be a bit more careful when it gets cold, like these minus 20, right? They're both okay around minus 15, right? But they can start complaining when you get to a minus 20 or minus 20. So let's go over it again. Mr. Lincoln, you definitely need to live in a sunny country for that one. The reason is it freezes down too much and it takes too long to recover, right? It is a beautiful, very fragrant rose, 9 out of 10 on fragrance, but it freezes down to harsh if you don't treat it right. Papa Milan, same thing, it won't flower enough for you, it'll freeze down a lot. And Oklahoma, Charles Mallorin, Eus Pichet often gets fungal disease and then kind of rots over the winter if you're not careful. Chrysler Imperial, Sweet Mademoiselle. Sweet Mademoiselle always gets fungal issues also during winter. And Isabel Renaissance will often just die on you. I don't know why, but I think I killed like 3 of that one over the winter, so not my favorite. And then you had Mariche L, Fragonard, Fragrant Cloud, Pierre Detti, Abbé de Cluny, Papa del Bard, and Madame Isaac Pereira, and Jubilee, Papillon, and Beering Renaissance. Those you can get away with growing in a moderate climate. That was it for today, guys. Hope it makes sense what you can grow where. These are my observations, and of course, if you're in a very sunny country, then you're really going to love this list because you will just do the opposite. You will grow a lot of these varieties, right? Take care, guys.